The ring was still warm when the call came in. I remember that detail because I'd been turning it on my finger the whole drive home from the reception, this nervous habit I'd picked up sometime between saying yes and saying I do. Gold, simple. Exactly what I'd asked for. My husband. My husband. I kept practicing saying that word, had kissed my knuckles in the car and said, "You're mine now, Lee. No more running." I'd laughed. I thought it was romantic. That was Saturday. The call came Tuesday morning, just after 7. I was still in the hotel bathrobe, the one from our mini honeymoon at the inn outside Savannah. My husband had left an hour earlier for a work call he said couldn't wait. I was eating leftover room service toast and watching the marsh through the window when my phone lit up. Unknown number. Georgia area code. I almost let it go. "Mrs. Hargrove?" The voice was a woman's. "Careful." The kind of careful that tells you someone's been rehearsing. "I work at the county clerk's office in Decatur. I processed your marriage license yesterday. There's something I need to tell you in person, not over the phone. I'm sorry, I know that's strange, but please, come alone." I sat there for a long moment with the phone pressed to my ear after she hung up. The toast went cold. My mother's voice came to me the way it always does when I go still like that. She'd said it at my college graduation. Then again the morning I left for my first deployment as an Army intelligence analyst. "Lee, your gut has never lied to you. The question is whether you're brave enough to listen." I got dressed. I didn't call my husband. The clerk's office was a low brick building off a one-way street, the kind of place that smells like old carpet and institutional coffee. The woman who met me was small, maybe 60, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the look on her face like she hadn't slept. Her name tag said Dolores. She shook my hand with both of hers and led me to a back room with a table and 2 chairs and a manila folder sitting between them like a verdict. "I've been in this office 22 years, she said, not sitting yet. "I've processed thousands of licenses. I know what a duplicate looks like." She opened the folder and pushed it toward me. There were 2 marriage certificates, both from Decatur County, both signed by my husband. The first was dated 3 years ago. The name beside his, a woman I'd never heard of. The second was mine, ours, dated Saturday. I read both documents twice. Then a third time, the way you read a word so many times it stops looking like a word. "He never filed for divorce," Dolores said quietly. "There's no record of it anywhere in the state." I remember the sound of a phone ringing somewhere down the hall. I remember the hum of the fluorescent light. I remember my own hands, completely still on the table, which surprised me because inside I felt like something had come loose from its mooring and was just spinning freely in the dark. "Does she know?" I asked. Dolores shook her head. "I don't know. I only know what's in front of me. And what's in front of you is that my marriage isn't legal." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I drove back to the inn on autopilot. The marsh was still beautiful. The Spanish moss still hung the same way it had that morning. The world had this infuriating habit of not rearranging itself when everything inside you just had. My husband was back in the room when I got there. Laptop open, jacket off, hair still perfect. He smiled when he saw me. "There you are. Thought maybe the marsh swallowed you." He patted the bed beside him. "Come sit. I found a restaurant for tonight." I sat in the chair across the room instead. "How long have you been married to her?" I asked. The smile didn't disappear right away. That was the part I kept coming back to in the weeks that followed. How long it took for the smile to leave his face. Like his body needed a moment to receive the message that the lie was over. "Lee, how long?" He closed the laptop. "It's complicated." That's not an answer. He was quiet for a moment. Then, 3 years. But it's been over for 2 of them. We've been separated. Separated isn't divorced. I was going to. "You were going to what?" My voice was calm. I'd learned that in the army. Calm isn't the same as okay. Calm is what you do when you need to keep thinking. You were going to file after our wedding? Before? When exactly was this going to be handled? He reached for my hand. I moved it to my lap. I love you, he said. That part is real. I'm sure it felt that way, I said, while you were standing in front of my family and committing a federal crime. I left the room and went to walk the marsh trail alone. The ground was soft under my shoes. A great blue heron stood in the shallows, completely motionless, like it was made of patience. I stood there watching it for a long time, my hands in my pockets, my mother's words cycling through my head. Your gut has never lied to you. I hadn't listened, or maybe I had, and I just called the feeling pre-wedding nerves and poured myself a second glass of champagne. Either way, I was standing in a Georgia marsh with a wedding ring on my finger that didn't mean what I thought it meant, and I had to figure out what came next. I called my mother from the trail. She answered on the second ring the way she always does. "Mom," I said. That was all I got out. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "How bad?" "Pretty bad." "Are you safe?" "Yes." "Then everything else can be dealt with." I heard her set something down on the counter, that small ceramic thud I'd known my whole life. "Come home, Lee. Come home first, and then we figure out the rest." I didn't go home first, and then we figure out the rest. I didn't go home that night. I needed more information before I could say anything to anyone, and I'd spent 6 years in intelligence knowing that the worst decisions come from incomplete pictures. I went back to the room, told my husband we'd talk in the morning, and lay awake on my side of the bed, listening to him breathe like everything was fine. At 2 in the morning, I got up, opened my laptop, and started searching. Her name was on the certificate. I found her social media in under 10 minutes. She lived 40 minutes north of us, in the same city where my husband had supposedly been doing contract work for the past 8 months. Her profile was mostly locked, but her cover photo was public. A kitchen table, morning light, a coffee mug with the handle that matched the one in my husband's apartment. The one I'd always assumed came from a box set. It didn't come from a box set. There were small public posts. A birthday message from a friend 3 months ago. "So glad you finally have someone who shows up for you." A comment she'd left on a local restaurant page, dated 6 weeks before our wedding. "My husband and I come here every anniversary. Best ribs in the county. My husband." 61 days before he stood at an altar in front of my mother and my grandmother and my old army unit and said the same word about me. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark hotel room with my hands flat on my thighs, pressing down, the way my first sergeant had taught me when the world started tilting. Anchor to something solid. Then move. The solid thing was this. I was 29 years old. I had a clearance, a good job, and a mother who had raised me to understand that the hardest thing about integrity is that it costs you something. I was going to figure out the truth. All of it. And then I was going to figure out what truth required of me. That morning, I drove to the address I'd found. I want to be honest about what I was feeling, because I've told this story enough times now to know that people expect me to say I was angry. I wasn't, not yet. Anger comes later, after the shock drains out. What I felt sitting in my car outside that house was something closer to grief. A clean, cold grief for the version of my life I'd been living in, the one where this wasn't possible. She answered the door in scrubs, clearly heading to work, dark hair, tired eyes, a stethoscope already looped around her neck. An ER nurse? I'd find out later. Someone whose whole job was managing chaos with steadiness. She looked at me. I looked at her. I'd thought about what to say the whole drive over, and now all of it was gone. "I married him Saturday," I finally said. The stethoscope swung slightly as she went still. Something moved across her face that I recognized, the same thing that had moved across mine in that clerk's office, the world rearranging itself. "Come in," she said quietly. We sat at her kitchen table. The mugs matched. I'd been right about that. She made coffee and we sat across from each other for a moment without speaking. He told me he'd ended things before he proposed to you, she said. Her voice was careful, deliberate. He told me it was over, that I needed to move on. But you didn't file for divorce. He said he'd handle it, that it was easier if he did. She looked down at her mug. I should have followed up. I didn't. We were both quiet. I think we're both missing the same information, I said. She looked up. What do you mean? I opened my phone and pulled up the public records search I'd done. 3 counties. I laid it on the table between us without saying anything. She read it slowly. Twice. Her jaw tightened. There was a third name. Another county. Another certificate. Dated 18 months ago. Neither of us had known. She drove to work an hour late that day. I sat in my car in her driveway for 20 minutes after she left, just watching the neighborhood go about its morning. A man walking a dog. A teenager waiting for a school bus. Everyone living inside their ordinary Tuesday without any idea that 2 women were somewhere close by, finding out they'd been sharing a life without knowing it. I called a lawyer before I called my mother. My mother had served as an army nurse for 20 years, and she raised me on 2 things: iced tea and the understanding that you don't make a single move without knowing what the ground looks like. So the first person I told the full story to was a family law attorney named Howard, a former JAG officer, who spent 45 minutes on the phone asking me precise and methodical questions, and then told me in a very even tone that I was looking at a bigamy case, that all 3 marriages were invalid, and that I should preserve every document I'd gathered. Every single thing, he said. Texts, emails, public records, the certificates. Everything. How do I report it? You file a complaint with the DA's office. I can help you prepare it. You file a complaint with the DA's office. I can help you prepare it. He paused. I want to ask you something first. Is there any part of you that isn't sure? I thought about that. Thought about the way the smile had taken too long to leave my husband's face. Thought about the coffee mug. The anniversary post. The 3rd certificate. No, I said. I'm sure. Then let's make sure the truth has a paper trail. I spent 2 days building the file. I was methodical the way the Army taught me. Everything labeled, everything dated, everything backed up in 2 places. My husband kept calling. I let it go to voicemail. His texts moved through the usual stages, explanations, then justifications, then a long silence, and then a message that said simply, I know you're talking to someone. Please don't do anything drastic. Drastic? I thought about that word for a while, the way people use it when they mean, please protect me from the consequences of what I did. I didn't respond. On Thursday, I drove to my mother's house. She met me on the porch before I'd even parked, the way she always has, like she can hear my engine from a mile out. She hugged me and didn't say anything, and I let myself stay in that hug longer than I usually would, because there's a specific kind of tired that only a mother's front porch can reach. Over tea at the kitchen table, I told her everything. She listened the way she always does, completely, no interruptions, hands folded on the table. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across and touched my wrist, right over the small scar I'd had since a training accident years ago. You know what I thought when you called me from the marsh? She said. What? I thought, she's going to try to fix this quietly, so nobody gets embarrassed. She shook her head. Don't do that. Don't you dare make yourself smaller to protect someone who did this. My grandmother had a saying. She stitched onto a sampler that still hangs in my mother's hallway. Truth told plainly is the kindest thing you can give. I'd walked past it my whole life. I stopped to look at it that afternoon on my way to the guest room, really look at it, the uneven letters and the faded blue thread. Kindest thing you can give. Not easiest. Kindest. The next morning I drove back to Decatur and met with Howard at his office. We filed the complaint together. He walked me through each page, measured, clear, no theater. When I signed the last form, I felt something settle in my chest. Not relief exactly, more like the feeling of weight being placed correctly. "What happens now?" I asked. "The DA reviews it. Given the documentation, there's a strong case. This'll take time, but it'll move." "And her? The other one I found?" "She's been in contact with our office since Wednesday," he said. "And the third one filed separately yesterday. 3 women, 3 marriage certificates. One man who'd apparently counted on all of us being too embarrassed to compare notes." I sat in Howard's parking lot for a few minutes after I left. The magnolia trees along the street were heavy with blooms. Everything smelled like early summer and cut grass. I called the ER nurse because I felt like she deserved to hear it from me directly. "It's moving forward," I told her. A pause. "Good," she said. "I have a 12-hour shift tonight and I'd like to be able to focus on it knowing that someone's handling the rest." I laughed, unexpected and real. "Go take care of people. You too," she said. "Starting with yourself." The weeks that followed were quiet in the way that aftermath is always quiet. Not peace exactly, more like the silence after something loud stops. My husband's attorney sent letters. Howard handled them. I went back to work, back to my routine, back to running 4 miles in the morning and keeping my desk organized and calling my mother on Sundays. People at work knew something was different. Nobody asked directly. The ones who'd been in the service understood, I think, that some things you process on your own terms. The one person I told voluntarily was my closest friend from my Army unit, a woman I'd served with in Fort Bragg and trusted with my life on more than one occasion. We met for lunch at her kitchen table. She'd moved to Atlanta after separating from service, and I told her the whole thing over chicken soup she'd made from scratch. She listened. Then she said, "You know what's remarkable?" "What?" "That your first call was to a lawyer and not to a dumpster fire." I did laugh at that. For a long time. "I thought about the dumpster fire option," I admitted. "But you didn't. My mother raised me better." She reached over and clinked her spoon against my bowl. "Here's to mothers and good lawyers." The hearing came 5 months later. I sat in the waiting room with fluorescent lighting and chairs that were clearly designed by someone who wanted people to leave quickly. The ER nurse was there too, across the room. We nodded at each other. Not friends, exactly, but something. 2 people who'd shared a strange and unwanted chapter and chosen to handle it with their heads up. When I walked out afterward, into actual sunlight, I stopped on the front steps and just breathed for a moment. A veteran I recognized from the support group I'd started attending at the VA was coming up the steps. He was retired Army 70s, the kind of person who said very little and meant all of it. He looked at me, the way you look at someone when you can tell they've just walked through something. "You all right?" he asked. "Getting there," I said. He nodded. "Good enough." Then he patted my shoulder twice and kept walking. Good enough. I held on to that. Months passed. The magnolias bloomed again. I went back to my life, the real one, the one made of work and running, and Sunday calls and learning how to live inside the truth of what had happened without letting it be the most important thing about me. What surprised me most in that time was how much I thought about the sampler in my mother's hallway. Truth told plainly is the kindest thing you can give. I used to think that was about honesty with other people. What I started to understand, slowly, was that it was also about being honest with yourself, about what you saw, what you knew, what you had always, somewhere underneath everything, already understood. My gut had known. I had just needed the courage to listen. One Sunday afternoon, I was helping my mother pull weeds in her garden when she stopped and looked at me with that look she has, the one that sees directly through whatever face I've put on. "You seem different," she said. "Different how?" She considered. "Settled. Like you finally stopped arguing with yourself." I pulled a long weed loose, roots and all, and tossed it aside. "I think I figured something out." "What's that?" "That finding out a hard truth doesn't break you." I sat back on my heels. It just shows you what was already true. And once you can see it, you can actually start. She smiled, the slow kind, the one that means she's storing this away. Your grandmother would have liked that. I looked toward the house, toward the hallway where the sampler hung, blue thread faded but still legible after 40 years. I've been thinking about her a lot lately, I said. She'd have had a few words for your husband. Strong words. She was a plain-spoken woman. So was her daughter, I said. My mother laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that fills a yard full and easy and unguarded. And I thought, there it is. That's the thing you fight for. Not the marriage that turned out to be a legal fiction, not the version of yourself that wanted everything to be fine. This, a garden in late afternoon, a mother laughing, the truth already settled, no longer something to be afraid of. I'd worn the ring for 16 days. I'd taken it off the morning I drove to the clerk's office and put it in the zip pocket of my bag, and not thought about it much since. One evening, a few months after the hearing, I found it while looking for a hair tie. I stood in my kitchen holding it, turning it in the light. It was still pretty. Small and gold and simple, exactly what I'd asked for. I donated it to a charity resale shop the next morning. Let it be something else for someone else. Let it start over. That felt right. The summer after everything concluded, I got a card in the mail. No return address, just a Decatur postmark. Inside was a small notacard with one line in neat handwriting. Thank you for not looking the other way. I don't know which of them sent it. I didn't need to know. I put it on my refrigerator next to a photo of my mother and me at her garden last spring, both of us laughing at something just off frame, both of us squinting in the same afternoon sun. I still run 4 miles in the morning. I still call my mother on Sundays. I still work in a field where I've learned to read what's hidden underneath the surface of things. I've thought a lot about what I'd tell someone who's standing where I stood, in a courthouse parking lot or a marsh trail or a back room with a folder on the table, staring down at something they didn't want to be true. I'd say this: the truth was always there. You didn't invent it. It was waiting for you to be ready to carry it. And carrying it, as hard and as costly as it is always better than setting it down and walking away. My grandmother knew that. My mother knew that. And somewhere in a garden in Georgia, I finally learned it too. The sampler is mine now. My mother gave it to me last Christmas, wrapped in tissue paper. No note. I hung it in my own hallway. Truth told plainly is the kindest thing you can give. I walk past it every morning. Some days it still costs me something. Most days it still costs me something. Most days it doesn't. And on the days it does, I think of a great blue heron standing still in marsh water, patient as anything, waiting for the moment to move. And I remember that still and stuck are not the same thing. That waiting with your eyes open is its own kind of courage. That's what I know now. And it's enough. I've thought about what made all of this possible, not just the deception, but my own part in it, because that's the honest thing to sit with. He didn't succeed alone. He succeeded because people like me, people who want to believe the best, can train themselves to look just past the thing that doesn't add up. To call it nerves, to pour another glass and move on. That's not weakness. I want to be clear about that. Wanting to trust someone you love is not a character flaw. But I've learned the difference between trust and willful blindness, and that difference lives in a very quiet place inside you that speaks only once before it goes silent. My mother called it gut. My first sergeant called it instinct. Whatever you name it, I ignored it. And the cost of that wasn't just a marriage that turned out to be legally meaningless. The cost was months of my life. A version of myself I had to rebuild from scratch. And a kind of grief that doesn't come with a clean name because you're not just mourning a person. You're mourning the story you believed you were living inside. What I keep coming back to is this: the truth was never hidden. It was filed in a county courthouse 40 minutes from my front door. It was in a public records database I could have accessed on my phone. It was in the small pauses he took before answering certain questions. The ones I filled in for him because I didn't want to hear what the silence meant. Every piece of it was there. I just hadn't asked the right questions yet. And that's the thing about integrity, your own integrity, the kind nobody else can give you or take away. It demands that you ask, even when you're afraid of the answer, especially then. Dolores asked herself whether staying quiet was something she could live with, and she decided it wasn't. That one decision, made by a woman I'd never met, sitting in a county clerk's office with reading glasses on a beaded chain, changed the entire direction of my life. She could have filed the paperwork and gone home. She didn't. That's what plain courage looks like. Not dramatic, not loud, just a person deciding that truth deserves a witness. Howard taught me something different, that knowing the truth is only the beginning. What you do with it, how carefully, how deliberately, how without anger, determines whether it actually lands anywhere or just explodes and leaves you standing in the wreckage. I was angry. Of course I was. But I'd spent years learning that anger makes you sloppy, and I wasn't willing to be sloppy with something this important. So I built the file. I labeled every document. I let the process do what the process is designed to do, and it worked. Not because I was special, but because I was steady. Lee had to learn that steadiness the hard way. But I think that's how most people learn it. Not in the quiet years, but in the ones that ask everything of you. If you're somewhere in the middle of your own hard chapter right now, I'm not going to tell you it gets easy. What I'll tell you is what the veteran on those courthouse steps told me without knowing the half of it. Good enough is enough to start with. You don't need to see the whole road. You just need to take the next step with your eyes open and your gut finally listened to. That's what I know now. And honestly, it's more than enough.